followers of this podcast will recall a great conversation we had a few weeks ago on the Brink about abortion and about attacks on women's reproductive rights. And I only let women on the show. I even kicked off our executive producer, no ads, nothing. It was just women. And this was part of a long-standing habit on my part, which is like, do not talk about abortion to people who don't have uteruses, or at least aspire to have uteruses. But a funny thing happened on that show as we began talking. The women all told me how wrong I was. And my three sons agree with that men are part of this whole problem and issue. They are affected by the rulings of the Supreme Court and our state legislatures, and they have a point of view that we have to hear. So I set out to find some intelligent men who are not afraid to speak out on an issue, even though they are not women themselves. They still see themselves as part of the discussion, and they have a lot to add. I found some great people. One is Paul Descula. He, for years, for 35 years, was in charge of a CEO, a series of Planned Parenthood health centers across upstate New York. He's now a book author in retirement. Jay Jochnowitz, I've known him for a long time. He's the former and still now, I guess, part-time editorial page editor at the Times Union. He has written for years about this issue and about the political effect of it. And my friend Mark Marchand, who is also a book author, a former PR expert, and I still have him speak to classes. He taught at UAlbany for a long time. And he knows a little bit about the kind of campaign that has been waged by, well, both the pro-life and the pro-choice people. So I thought they would make for an interesting conversation today. And I'm going to start with just an easy opener. Jay, I'm going to lob it to you first. What do you think men can add to the discussion about whether or not abortion should be free and open access to everyone? What can men say and add to that debate?
I do want to correct one thing.
Okay.
That my successor doesn't take me to task. I'm editor at large now. Not editorial
not
page
editorial page editor. Okay, I got your
editor.
title wrong.
If I was in academia, they would call it emeritus.
Yeah.
Anyway, what men can offer to this discussion? Well, unfortunately or unfortunately, we're intimately involved in this because I think if you look around the country at state legislatures, the gender imbalance still exists in most places. And so, for better or worse, it's men who are making these policy decisions. So it's important that men hear from other men on what this is about and hear it perhaps from a male point of view that says, hey, look, we're talking about our wives, we're talking about our daughters, and in many ways, we're talking about ourselves. Uh, in the sense that if our daughter comes to us or our wife comes to us with this decision and wants our input on it or our help or our support, we need to be there and we need to understand the issue and we need to understand it from a woman's point of view as well as from a man. I mean, to have that input and to say, if you're on the fence about this, here's what we can do. If you're not on the fence, here's how I will help you. So all of that is really relevant. I should say, and I should add that, I think I have an unusual perspective on this. My wife, I have a perspective that's probably closer to my wife's perspective than what used to be. My wife was raised Catholic. She is, and she was also raised by a very feminist mother. So her father was Catholic, studied for the priesthood, no less, and was very anti-abortion. And her mother was very pro-abortion rights. And so Lisa's perspective on this is that while she cannot see herself, well, no longer anyway, but never did see herself having an abortion from a personal point of view. She never would impose that point of view on a person, on another woman. And I had long felt that the issue of abortion didn't, I don't want to say didn't matter to me, but it I did not see an issue with abortion at all. In other words,
Mhm.
I was for the right, and I had no moral issues with abortion.
But it
That
was mostly hypothetical, you're saying.
correct,
Yeah, didn't affect you personally. Mhm.
and that changed. That position evolved over the years, and I am closer to my wife's point of view, where I personally don't fit. I'm not. Uh, I would agree with abortion as a woman's option, but I don't personally. I would rather see a pregnancy go to term,
Sure.
if possible. So I'm more on the Hillary Clinton thing, where I'd like abortion to be rare, safe, and legal.
That's a good way to put it. Mark, tell us about your perspective. What do
Sure,
you think men can add to this conversation?
sure. And might I say at the beginning, I'm deeply honored to be among the first men that you've invited to participate in this discussion on abortion.
I'm going to actually listen to you. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good, and I think that's because you've known me over the years, and as an adjunct in the journalism program there, and at UAlbany and Rosemary. In fact, I think you were the department chair for a
Mhm.
time while I taught there. Yeah, and a couple of things that Jay actually said struck me that, I've always looked at it, and both my wife and I were raised in very traditional Catholic households. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, both my wife and I left the church because we were
Mhm.
so upset with the sexual abuse scandal. And we realized that some of the money we were putting in the basket was being used to fight victims of sex abuse. So I think we were always adult enough to look at an issue and make decisions based on on their merits, and not how, we were raised in a traditional background. I've always been a traditional liberal progressive from Massachusetts.
Mhm.
I grew up as a Kennedy Democrat. And I'm kind of unusual in that I studied science in college at UMass Amherst, and chemistry, minored in journalism. So I've always taken kind of an empirical look at this. And I
Mhm.
never looked at this as an us versus them. I've looked at this from a sort of a very as pragmatic as possible point of view, that what right do I have as one of those men across the country, as Jay said, who are mostly in charge of making these decisions, what right do I have to impose that ideology on a woman's right in general, on reproductive rights? And I have a lot more to say on it on the PR point of view, but I'm going to wait for your prompting on that.
Okay.
But I just don't think that there was ever any way, shape, or form that women should be dictated to in this fashion. I remember sitting with a very dear friend of mine. He's a fellow pilot at a bar once. We share our a lot of
Mhm.
common views, and we were talking politics. It's way back in the pre-COVID days, and what we believe in, what we don't believe in. And he said, I believe in everything. He said, I'm willing to listen to you liberal progressives from Massachusetts, but I draw the line with abortion. And I
Ugh.
looked at him and I said, well, why? He had no reason. He said, that's just what I believe. That,
Mhm.
and I said, so your belief, that you just don't like this part of reproductive health and decision making, is why you should impose that view on another human being. And over the years, I've noticed that common thread when I talk to people about abortion. Nobody has ever espoused to me a legitimate reason why I should tell a woman why she can't have an abortion. So I've always tried to look at it from a scientific, pragmatic point of view, and that even from a public policy point of view, that me and other men didn't have a right to impose that point of view or that restriction on women. And that's the way I've always
Well,
looked at
that's interesting. In the previous podcast on this subject with women, I said you have espoused what is also Joe Biden's. Ironically, that's his stand. He is a strong Catholic, does not believe personally in abortion, would not want women in his life to have had an abortion, but does not feel it should be imposed on others. And the view is, well, nothing about any abortion law says you have to have an abortion. So just let other people alone. And I was called to task for that by a listener who said, well, that's like saying you don't care about life. Murder is a sin, it's a crime. And if you equate abortion with murder, and we're getting very close to making fetal personhood a reality in this country, then you're saying, well, you shouldn't fight against murder. So it's a moral and a religious imperative. Do you see that? Because you just made the same argument I did, Mark.
Yeah, I do, and and I'll sort of start to stray into the PR aspects of this, and by the way, I long ago left the Catholic belief system. I'm simply a person who believes in what's right is what's right. I am, deeply ensconced in faith and just simply doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Catholic dogma, I've sort of left that way behind. I think it's always been very artful on the part of opponents of abortion to come up with that phrase pro-life, which gets right directly
Oh
to what
yeah.
you're talking about, Rosemary, and how we're now extending that and projecting that to the fetus. And one of my old bosses back at Verizon, and that's where I spent most of my career as a senior manager in PR at Verizon. He said back in the 90s, before social media, before the internet, he said, I was complaining. It might have even, Jay, I apologize. It might have even been about a Times Union story. And I was complaining and delving into the nits and lights of a particular story and disagreeing with how one aspect was reported. But my boss, Peter, said to me, it's a war of headlines. In that, you got the headline honest. The headline agreed with the company's point of view, but as you parse the story, it was kind of all over the place. So it always irritated me and sort of, and again, I'll get into that later, how we sort of fight that. But once you scrape below that mantra of pro-life, and look at why do you define it that way, why are you extending it to a fetus, it's almost like there's no there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was just one of those things that just stuck,
Right.
and they still use it today. you know um, I carry that through, to their artfulness and talking about Planned Parenthood. They very successfully branded Planned Parenthood as an abortion provider. And so they're bad. They're
Right.
evil. And not even getting into the myriad host of ways that Planned Parenthood provides medical services to people who don't have access to them, way beyond
Right.
abortion.
Right.
And I think, and it's always irritated me, and I think that's the challenge in front of us, those who simply believe at their core. And a year or two ago, I took one of my long drives out west, and on the way back, I stopped in Seneca Falls, and to see Elizabeth Cady Stanton's house, and I was reminded, and it was inspirational to me about this equivalency, that how it took us so long to do certain things for women, and yet here we are today in the 21st century trying to roll stuff back
Mm-hmm.
and go back to a point in time when women didn't have these rights. I'll sort of close just that part of this, Rosemary, by saying this is before COVID. I sat in on this great New York Writers Institute session with Salman Rushdie, um, way before the time when he was attacked out west, speaking. And he had a new book and he was talking about it. And somebody in the crowd in the Q&A session had the temerity to ask him, what do you think about this burgeoning MAGA movement, Make America Great Again movement? And Salman didn't miss a beat. He said, well, what part of America these great golden days do you want to go back to when we led the world in slavery, right? And we believed there was so much of the country that believed in slavery, it almost tore the country apart in the Civil War. Or do you want to go back to the time when we didn't allow women to vote until the 19th Amendment in 1920, I think it was? Or do you want to go back to the time in America when we interned Japanese Americans just because of their ethnic heritage during World War II? And so what he was saying, and I think is core to this argument, is it's all about going back and restoring things to what their view is of this great America. And we have warts, we have things that we wish didn't happen. But his point was you can spend all the time in the world wishing to go back, but we should be looking forward. And to me, that's the pitch battle we're involved in, women's reproductive rights with, taking away Roe v. Wade and, going back to that time where they believe that was a greater America when women could get an abortion. So I'll stop there.
Well, you are listening to Mark Marchand, who is a writer and a teacher and a PR expert and a pretty great world traveler and a flyer. And you can see he has lots of ideas that I'm sitting here applauding, saying, "Wow, he sounds like almost like a woman." That's a compliment. That's a compliment.
Okay.
Jay, let me get you back into this because I want you to talk about cruelty. As I was sitting down trying to get you all on Zoom this morning, I read an article out of Louisiana where legislators have actually passed a law saying that if you are a child victim of rape, so that's incest or rape, you must carry the child that you become impregnated with to term. And I am struck again with the cruelty of these laws. It's not just misogynistic against women, but it's just downright cruel. We're seeing cases now where women who are carrying fetuses that are untenable, children who will not live once they are separated from their mother, they must carry them to term, watch them die, and then pay and go through the hell of a funeral of a child. And that is what our legislators want. The cruelty of this strikes me even more than how what an affront it is to my rights as an American. Can you talk about any of that for a minute?
Yeah, and from a male point, I see this from a male point of view, and I don't understand why men do not, the men who are making these laws don't see it from the point of view, because I would bet that if you ask them this question, do you want your daughter or do you want your wife to have to carry a rapist's baby to term? They would probably say no. To a man, maybe there might be a few extraordinarily righteous people out there and consistent in righteous in the sense that they are consistent and sincere in their views, who would say, I would not be happy about it, but I would live with it. The child is separate for the fetus. The child is separate from the rapist, and that fetus has a right to life. I could see some men saying that, but I think most men honestly would say they just could not abide that. That the entire notion is so, it's just 9 months of repeating the rape essentially every day. It's a reminder of it. So the cruelty of that is just extraordinary to me.
And that's a change, Jay. The anti-abortion, there's nothing new with that. We've been listening to lots of discussion about that since at least the 70s in this country. But always, up until very recently, rape and incest were supposed to be exceptions. Rape, incest, and health of the mother. Now we have the Supreme Court deciding whether, if you present as a pregnant woman in trouble, whether abortion is an option, unless you're like on the brink of death. You have to be, it can't just be dangerous to your health. It has to be, you're going to die if we don't do this. That's a change. Where does that come from? Where has that arisen?
I think it comes from a very purist fundamentalist version of this, that there was a willingness to for lack of a better word, compromised along the, for many years and say, all right, we don't agree with abortion, but we're going to allow it in cases of rape or incest, or with the life of the mother, at least, if not the health of the mother, as exceptions. And I think that the people that are running the anti-abortion movement at this point, and who have the ears of the legislatures around the country and are in the legislatures around this country, are saying that how can you have an exception if you believe that it's murder? How can you have an exception at all? And I think that's what they've, this is where we are. There was never any I don't think there was ever really any doubt about it, that
Yeah.
this is where they would head if the legal decisions went their way. I should also say, I hope, can something be edited out? This is
Yes.
simply a
Yes.
technical point. Okay.
Okay.
I'll take a pause so that there's a good gap there. But I just got to notice that my free meeting will end in 10 minutes.
That's okay. We'll be done by then. We're almost
Okay.
done. I think we'll be okay. I want to go back to Mark. You're talking about how smart the pro-abortion, I'm not going to say pro-life, they're not. They believe in executions. They have a horrible policy about end-of-life treatment as well. But the anti-abortion people were smart. They quickly caught on to names and labels and slogans that have helped them. Did the pro-abortion people make a mistake?
I don't think they made a mistake. I think they're just not aggressive enough, and I don't think that all of the pro-choice folks who simply believe in a woman's reproductive rights have studied enough the tactics of the GOP. I've studied that for a year, and I've talked about that in my classes at UAlbany, that going back to the Bush-Dukakis election, where the Republicans effectively labeled Michael Dukakis as this liberal Democrat from Massachusetts and really defined him, or Dukakis had a chance to define himself, that, we need, those who believe in fighting against this, I think, need to come up with those much more simpler messaging points, above and beyond pro-choice. And one of my ideas is something I believed in over the years, is sort of reverse engineering this instead of fighting this in a public policy battle. And by the way, I think there's a huge amount of pent up energy there to fight this. One only has to look at those marches after Trump was elected, the women marches in Washington, D.C. But from a PR point of view, sort of looking at their tactics, reverse engineer it and look at the people who are being affected. I think it's great to look back and complain and say Trump did this, or the 6-3 Supreme Court did this, even though they lied and said they wouldn't do it, that it was established law. I believe, and something I tried at Verizon when we were trying to get out there with talking about our new high-speed broadband, and the story wasn't coming across, we let some reporters try it. And reporters, these individuals, then wrote about this new amazing broadband and told the story better than we could. I think we need to do a better job of getting women who are affected by this to tell their story, like the woman in Texas who was affected so badly by this law, but sort of coming back and kind of like, the smoking campaign and the people who've had all these disastrous illnesses, which I think is effective and scary. But finding more women and having them as an individual tell their story, that
Yeah.
this is
I actually find it a little intrusive that women are sort of expected for the movement to talk about their abortions. It's like an invasion of privacy on it. I understand it as a journalist, as a public relations
but
move, but wow.
not women talking about their abortions, but women in general talking about how they could be affected. Younger women of childbearing age, that this is, and I agree with you, that would be very much an intrusion of privacy for somebody who has undergone an abortion. But I'm talking about women in general.
Yeah, like women who are afraid to have children because if there's a defect, you have to have it anyway. Right, right. I'm going to interrupt you because I want to get to Jay on this, and that is our politicians, again, they're mostly men making these calculations, underestimating how angry women are. Will this have an effect on the polls, the presidential election, the Senate races? Politicians are being asked about their abortion views, and most of them are hiding them, from what I see. Do you think it's going to have any effect?
And they have hidden it for years. When we're talking about sloganeering and messaging and stuff, for years. And I frequently referred to this in editorials and called it, basically a weasel response. Um, when you would ask politicians, where do you stand on abortion rights? And they would say, well, Roe v. Wade is the law of the land.
Yeah.
And my question to them, in editorial board meetings was always a follow-up. Yeah, and if you're in a position to change the law, are you going to? Do you want to? And they would just, kind of repeat that until you backed them as far into a corner as you could. And then they would say, look, and they would say pro-life. We did, by the way, as a policy, and I don't think I was letting my bias intrude on an editorial decision. I did insist that when people wrote about this, they referred to they could refer to anti-abortion or pro-abortion rights,
Right.
but could not use the term pro-life. I said it's just too loaded a term. It's not fair. Oh, and
Unborn child is the worst. Unborn
yeah, that
child
was
is
the one.
absolutely the worst. You're not a child if you need to have an umbilical cord still attached to you to live.
Yeah.
That's just, yeah, I know. We are running out of time, and I'm so sorry because you guys are great and we could do this again, and we probably will. This issue is not going away. You've been listening to Mark Marchand and Jay Jochnowitz. Thank you so much for your input on this. Please listen to On the Brink on Apple, YouTube, Google, Spotify. Oh, go ahead and think of some other podcast platform that you like. We're there too. You can help us to attract more sponsors and thus more high quality programming by liking us, rating us, in general, by engaging with us on social media. Even call us if you want. This will not cost you anything except a few minutes of your time, and it will make a difference. Segments of On the Brink can be heard weekly on the Hudson Mohawk Magazine, a feature of WOOC Radio, that's 105.3 FM. This magazine is a volunteer-produced local news hour that airs discussions and debates about topics that affect our world. I want you to hear now from Paul Druscula. He is a very special guest. We're lucky to have him. Paul spent 35 years as president and CEO of a network of Planned Parenthood health centers all around upstate New York. And then he retired recently to write books, and he's already published a mystery. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit about it. Phaedra and the Half Boy. Do I have that right?
Yes.
So let me start off, Paul, if I can, with some history, referring back to those 35 years. You've seen a whole lot of movement on the question of abortion in the United States. I want to know, how the heck did we get here? Did you ever anticipate that Roe v. Wade would be overturned and we'd be thrown back into the 70s?
I was thinking about the 70s, actually, when the liberal law was passed in New York State. Nelson Rockefeller, Republican governor, state Senate, Republican majority, state assembly, Republican majority.
Wow.
When I was with Planned Parenthood up in Watertown, we gave awards out to people like Sherwood Boehlert, who was a congressman, Republican, supportive of reproductive rights. Bob Nortz, a Republican state assembly person who again, was pro-choice and extremely supportive. So we've come from this point where this was never a Democrat or Republican issue. And certainly in terms of Planned Parenthood, we had people on our boards of directors who were both Republican and Democrats. Mm-hmm. So this has gradually changed over a period of time to the point where nobody can talk to each other anymore.
That's exactly true. And it has become politicized. Most people blame Richard Nixon for that. He wanted the evangelical vote, and the way to get it was to say, I support life, even before it comes into the world. You agree with that? You lived through it in Planned Parenthood. You saw it become first supported and then attacked.
Well, you know, the weird part about Richard Nixon, who I despise, was he actually signed into law Title X legislation, which created this incredible network of family planning programs. Before that, we were all little tiny mom and pop shops. We were basically in church basements. Mm-hmm. And Nixon, who knew, and Papa Bush, who was in the assembly at the time, supported the Title X legislation. So for all these decades, family planning programs have been nurtured by a law that Richard Nixon put into play. My big problem with the Republican Party and conservative Christians focuses more on Karl Rove and George Bush, because it was Karl Rove who convinced George Bush. He couldn't get George H.W. Bush to commit to these conservative ministers, but he got George Bush to jump in with both feet. And I think that marked a real turning point and created something of what we see today.
That's a good point. I had forgotten that piece of the history. Rove saw the power of that vote, of that Christian vote, and went for it. Well, how about Trump, who has been pro-life, pro-choice, anything that gets him votes, and he's given us the Supreme Court we have now. That, well, I know you're no fan of the Supreme Court. I've seen your Facebook page.
Well, I'm no fan of how at least 3 of those justices got there. You know, the Republicans, again, have been brilliant about this. They've created a laboratory for Supreme Court justices. They grow them in test tubes. They basically, they choose them from a list provided to them by conservative groups. And they have Mitch McConnell standing over, making sure that he can cheat it on at least 2 of those last 3 choices. So, you know, this Supreme Court is not very impressive in my mind. And I'm really troubled by the notion that they're looking at mifepristone right now. When you and I talked about doing this, I started to look at the mifepristone issue, and I went to the amici brief done by the it's the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Medical Association, the Academy of Family Physicians. There's about 20 groups in here, and their amici brief tears apart this whole question of why in the world is this issue on the table? Mm-hmm. Why are these conservatives challenging the scientific underpinnings of mifepristone? Mifepristone, I remember this back in the 80s. Mifepristone was approved in France in 1988. It was basically developed by a French company, UCLAF or something like that. That's why it was originally called RU486. Mm-hmm. But they did an enormous amount of testing themselves. They approved it in France. China picked it up. A number of other countries picked it up. And this is Papa Bush's problem. Papa Bush got the FDA to ban the drug. And it stayed that way for 12 years until Bill Clinton took office, and then he removed the ban. And so now, after those 12 years where millions of women have used the drug safely, the FDA picks it up. And now we have a base of 5 million users. And the FDA has this enormous cache of knowledge about the drug, and it is safer than Advil.
Right.
I mean,
this is not about the drug. It's about the politics of this.
Exactly.
And it's one of the scariest things to me about the latest round of abortion restrictions is how it's bleeding into other parts of our law. In Texas right now, vigilantism has been approved. If you see someone getting an abortion, if you're driving them to an abortion place, you can now be charged. We're just a step away from charging women, from taking away babies. I find it terrifying, but I think maybe I'm exaggerating because I am so wrapped up in this. Do you think I am? Your face is saying no.
This is evil personified. Yeah. I don't even like to travel to Texas anymore.
Yeah.
There's a story recently about a man who was divorced, and his wife was pregnant, and obviously the divorce took place. She left the state to have an abortion because she couldn't have it in the state. And he now has a lawyer, and he's starting to research who the people were who helped his wife get to the abortion provider, who the abortion providers were. And the threat here is that he's going to try to apply some felony to all of these people who might have had an indirect relationship to that abortion. Now this, he may not get what he wants out of it, but the fear factor is enormous.
Of course it is, yeah. And it doesn't really have to do with a dispute over whether a couple wants a child or not. It usually has to do with revenge or anger after there's been an interpersonal breakup. So yeah, I am terrified by that. And other things too. I think contraception is in danger right now. Sex education has never been embraced in the country. So what are you left with? I feel like we're going back into the medieval ages. Is The Handmaid's Tale that far off? Let me boil down my question.
As I was watching The Handmaid's Tale, I thought, this is really too close for comfort.
It really is.
I don't know. I don't despair, but I think that I'm really afraid, and I think we need to organize now. We have an advantage now. This is a terrible thing to say, but now that Roe is gone, our anger level is so high in a significant portion of the population that we need to convert that into the presidency taking the Senate back. Maintaining control and getting greater control over the Senate, and hopefully ending the filibuster so we can actually get something done, and taking back the House. So we need to.
Don't leave out the state legislators too.
Exactly.
Because much of the action has happened in state legislatures, which Republicans and conservatives spent 10 years methodically taking over, while Democrats, I think, paid too much attention to the presidency and not enough to the lower levels. Let me add one more layer to this, Paul, and that is the issues of rape or incest. Even in the 70s and the 60s, when abortion was largely banned in the U.S., there were exceptions made for rape and incest. Those seem all to be gone now, with this whole idea of fetal personhood. How that embryo got there no longer matters. What happened to the woman no longer matters. It's all about the embryo or the fetus. Am I right in that? How did this come up? What did I miss that suddenly rape or incest was, well, that's too bad, but the child has priority?
You know, these embryo arguments have been out there for a very long time. So I'm not surprised that once they won at the Roe v. Wade level, the next thing they were going to do was focus on embryos. And if you make the embryos sacred, you eliminate a lot of possibilities.
Yes.
So you've mentioned rape and incest, and I was really happy that you called me to do this, because I began to look at things that I really wanted to find out more about. I've always been, I actually came to Planned Parenthood because a family member was the victim of rape prior to Roe v. Wade. And she became pregnant as a result of the rape, and then had to find a place that would provide an abortion for her. And of course, the Catholic Church was useless in this regard, because her priest was basically telling her, you know, this is a life, you have to carry it forward. She finally found Planned Parenthood. They weren't doing abortions then, but they referred her to Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester. She had to go in front of a panel of I want to say psychiatrists, because they were testing her psychiatric reaction to the rape and the pregnancy as a result of the rape. And it was that panel, whoever made up the panel, that had to decide whether she qualified for an abortion at Strong Memorial or not. And she did qualify, but I don't think that the experience ever left her.
Yeah.
So I've been motivated for a long time on that. And you got me to look up some data on that, because people are always minimizing the issue of, women getting pregnant as a result of rape. That's not a significant number. They finally did a study in 2017 after 20 years of doing nothing. 3 million women alive then in the USA experienced rape-related pregnancy. 3 million.
Wow.
And that was out of a population of 18 million women who experienced vaginal rape in their lifetime. So we're not talking about small numbers.
Small numbers, no. What conservatives will do is minimize rape and incest. You know, do you remember that whole argument a few years ago that when you're afraid women, you get a special hormone that blocks you from getting pregnant? We had a good laugh over that, but now they seem to believe it. So they minimize that number, and they inflate the number of women who get abortion in the third trimester. I hate it that was part of the debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton. Those are very rare, very traumatic, nothing to do with politics. It's between a woman and her doctor and her family if she chooses. So the numbers, and it's all about the politics. What we argue, what numbers we pick have to do with politics.
Thank you for saying that. The conservatives actually treat late-term abortion as if women are deciding, you know what, I need to travel to Europe, and this is such an inconvenience. I'm going to have this abortion even though I'm 30 weeks into the pregnancy. It's like,
yeah. My bathing suit isn't fitting. I need a better look. This is better than dieting. Let's get an abortion. It's just insane. I do. The view of women is very much part of this, that they're silly, flighty, unable to make their own decisions, selfish. It's just a very misogynistic view, I think. We have to talk though about politics more. And back in the 70s, I was in college, and abortion was not legal in New York. But if you were on the Syracuse University campus, as I was, and you were a young girl in trouble, you could go to a clergyman, an association of clergymen of all things, and they helped you to get an abortion. They flew you to some place where it was acceptable. They had a network. These underground networks are now popping up in places like Idaho, which has a horrendous medieval abortion law now. So women are going to still get abortions, whether it's legal or not. What can we do? What should women and men who sympathize, what should they be doing to get the laws changed so that you don't have to resort to underground activity?
We first have to undo gerrymandering. I mean, not first, but it's a significant issue. Again, you prodded me into looking at gerrymandering, and I looked at the state of Wisconsin because the rumor has it that Wisconsin is probably one of the most gerrymandered states in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Here are some numbers from Wisconsin. In the 2018 state elections, the Democrats drew 54% of the popular vote, more than half. Now, they have 99 assembly seats. Let's say it's 100 so that I don't have to do the math on this. The Democrats should have gotten at least 50 of those seats and more. They got 36. The Republicans got 63. Flash forward to 2022, the Dems got 50% of the vote, split evenly. So they should have gotten 50 seats. They got 35, and the Republicans got 64. And in the Senate that year, the Democrats got 11 and the Republicans got 21.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the good news here is that because of Roe, they have a new Supreme Court justice who is pro-choice, and she now gives them a majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and they now have a piece of legislation that undoes the gerrymanders and forces Wisconsin to have all of those seats in the Senate and the Assembly elected this year in 2024. So that literally, normally they would,
Right.
They would segment that out by years. They're all up for election.
So they're trying to unrig the rigging.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that will make a difference, right? And a lot more things than women reproductive rights, but they will be affected. Yeah, we've been watching Wisconsin closely. Anything else, Paul? We're running out of time, and I really appreciate your being here. Any other point we didn't hit that you want to make?
Let me think.
I promise this will not be your last invitation to come on the show. This is an issue we're going to be following.
Well, I have a list of positive things I'd like to see.
Okay.
Well, I'm not going to read it off for you now. It's too long. But the end of the Electoral College, for example, little things like that.
Small, minor things, adjustments that can be made easily.
Statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico.
And for Puerto Rico, yep.
This whole idea of how we divided up the states and how we composed the Senate and give the minority so much, minority population, not minority population, but a minor
part of the, right. Well, it sounds like you're saying the Constitution is out of date. However, the issue there is if we were to have a new constitutional convention, it would not become more liberal. It would not become more modern. Yeah.
No, I don't want that either. They talked about that periodically in New York State, and I know that would be chaos.
Yes.
But in terms of the Electoral College, there is a proposed system out there where the states could vote to cast their electoral votes for the winner of the popular vote in the overall election.
Yes, that has caught on in recent years. More than several states are doing it, but not
I don't
all.
know. Yeah, I know. I don't know what the status of that is even, but at least there's some other option besides having a constitutional convention where all hell would break loose.
Exactly. Okay, this is a difficult toast. Usually men drive me to drink. I'm not drinking to men. But my hat's off and my glasses up to the men you've heard on this show, and to others like them who are man enough to champion women, who recognize that women's rights are human rights. To you. We are proud to be sponsored by the sales award-winning Donna Frank team of luxury property specialists at Berkshire Hathaway Blake Realtors. Donna is a very old and good friend from my WAMC days, and I can vouch for her skill, energy, and real estate expertise. Check out the Donna Frank team on Facebook, or you can contact her at this email, donnafed, DONAFED, @gmail.com. You will be happy that you did. Karen's Place is a phenomenal 4-bedroom guest house in Bennington, Vermont. It has a private pool, a spa, a fireplace. It's beautiful surroundings. This is the perfect spot to rent if you have a family reunion coming up, a wedding or other special occasion, or for any company events and retreats. And if you mention that you heard about Karen's Place from On the Brink, you will get a special discount. Go to naturelogs.com, please, to see the work of our talented sponsors, Denise and Scott Stoner. This husband-wife duo writes and shoots amazing things about nature. They have traveled around the country, and sometimes they just look up in the sky and get these amazing subjects: birds, landscapes, eclipse, bugs. Nature Logs offers photos, prints, and note cards. And the Stoners also do slide presentations and lectures. You can find out about them at naturelogs.com, naturelogues.com. Sarah Albright, who took over ownership of the Apple Barn and Bake Shop in Bennington not too long ago, has written this great mission statement for her place that I want you to hear. Okay, I know I hate the whole idea of a mission statement, and especially I don't see how it applies to someplace I go to because of their apple and blueberry pies. I get that. But this is a woman who really is taking seriously the landmark business that she has acquired, and she wants to make something of it. I love that. Here's what she wrote. We are continuing a legacy of engaging travelers and the local community alike and strengthening our brand by bridging the divide between education, tourism, and food. We deliver real local Vermont. I love this, and you will too. Please check out theapplebarn, all one word.com.